The morning he shattered my collarbone, I was making oatmeal. That's the part nobody believes, that something so ordinary was happening at the exact moment my life broke in two. The kettle was on. My daughter's backpack was hanging by the door. The CBC was murmuring low from the kitchen radio, something about the weather in Ottawa, and I was stirring the pot and thinking I needed to pick up more brown sugar from the Loblaws on my way home from work, and then he was behind me. I don't remember exactly what I said to make him angry. I think it was about the insurance paperwork. I had found something in his car the week before, a letter from an address I didn't recognize, and I had made the mistake of asking about it calmly, rationally, the way you're supposed to handle things when you're trying to keep a marriage together. He had deflected then, but something about that morning made him decide he was done deflecting. I felt his hand on my shoulder before I understood what was happening, and then I was against the counter edge, and the pain that shot through my left side was a kind of white that I hadn't known existed before that moment. I slid down to the floor. From where I lay, I could see the rubber boots my daughter had left beside the back door. Pink, with little frogs on them. She was 5.5, and she was deeply serious about those boots, wore them in all weather, and I remember staring at them while my husband stood over me and said very quietly that I had better not make a scene. He left for work 20 minutes later. I heard him lock the door from outside. My daughter found me still on the kitchen floor. She was so careful. That's the thing that breaks me open when I think about it even now. She was 5 years old and she was careful. She didn't scream, didn't panic. She crouched down next to me the way she'd seen me crouch next to her when she'd fallen, and she put one small hand on my cheek and said, "Mommy, you look really bad." And then she said, "Should I call Grandma?" I had taught her. 6 months earlier, after the first time he shoved me down the stairs and I told myself it was an accident, I had sat with her at the kitchen table and we practiced dialing my mother's number. I made it a game. I told her it was a secret code only we knew. I told her if Mommy ever looked very sick, she could use the secret code. I never told her what the secret really meant. I don't think she needed me to. She made the call. I heard her small voice in the hallway, "Grandma, Mommy's on the floor and she can't get up." And then she came back and sat next to me and held my hand until my mother arrived. My mother had a key. He didn't know that. The ambulance ride was something I have mostly blocked. I remember the ceiling of the vehicle and thinking very clearly, this is the last time. I'm not going back. I also remember being afraid because I had thought that before, twice, and I had gone back both times. The hospital confirmed a fractured clavicle. The nurse who documented my injuries was a woman with short grey hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she asked me in a voice that was so steady it felt like a hand extended, whether I wanted to speak to someone from the social work team. I said yes before I finished understanding the question. My husband texted me 3 times while I was in the emergency department. The first said he hoped I was okay. The second said I needed to calm down. The third said that if I said anything to the doctors, I would regret it. I showed all 3 to the social worker. Her name isn't important, but what she said to me is, she said, "You didn't cause this. You survived, and now it's up to you what happens next." She said it plainly, without performance, in the way Canadians sometimes say hard things. Directly, but with a kind of gentleness underneath. And something in me that had been clenched for 4 years started, very slowly, to loosen. My mother took my daughter to her house in Barrie that evening. I stayed one night in the hospital, and then I did not go home. I want to back up. I want to tell you about who I was before him, because I think it matters. I was 26 when we met, working at a marketing firm in downtown Toronto, the kind of glass and granite building where everyone is always performing competence at someone else. I was good at my job. I had a small apartment in the annex that I loved unreasonably. It had a clawfoot tub and a radiator that clanged, and my friend and I used to sit on my fire escape in July with cold beer and feel like we had figured something out. He walked into a campaign pitch meeting, and I thought he was the most self-assured person I had ever been in a room with. He knew what he wanted. He said so clearly. He was attentive in a way that felt, at the time, like being chosen. We were engaged after 14 months, married 9 months after that. My daughter was born the following spring. Looking back, and I have spent so much time looking back, I can trace the shift to when I was pregnant. That's when the criticism started. Small at first, I wasn't sleeping correctly, I was too emotional, I was relying too much on my mother's advice, and not enough on his. He had opinions about everything, and they were always framed as concern. I kept thinking he was just anxious about becoming a father. I kept extending grace. The first shove happened when my daughter was 8 months old. I was exhausted in a way that felt cellular, and I said something sharp. I don't even remember what, and he pushed me sideways into the doorframe of our bedroom. I stood there in shock. He said it was an accident. He said I had startled him. He held me and cried, and I believed him because I wanted to, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to see. That's the part people don't understand about staying. It's not stupidity. It's not weakness. It's that you are constantly being given just enough to hold on to. One good week, one genuine apology, one evening, where he is the person you thought you married, and your whole self orients toward that like a plant toward a window. You are trying to keep something alive. But the shoves became grabbing. The grabbing became throwing. And through all of it, I kept working, kept showing up, kept taking my daughter to swimming lessons at the Peel Aquatic Center on Saturday mornings and drinking coffee in the bleachers with the other parents and performing a version of myself that was completely fine. The letter I found in his car was from a woman in Oakville. I know now because my divorce lawyer found more, not one letter but 3 years of phone records, hotel receipts, and eventually a legal document that stopped my breath. A lease co-signed. They had a shared apartment in Mississauga. They had been living there on weekends for 2 years. They had a son, 14 months old. I sat in my lawyer's office on King Street and I stared at that document and I thought, the whole architecture of my life has been built on something that doesn't exist. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That came later. First, there was the morning on the kitchen floor, and my daughter's frog boots, and the fracture in my collarbone, and the decision I made in that ambulance. My mother and I sat at her kitchen table in Barrie the night after I was discharged. My daughter was asleep in the back bedroom, in the twin bed with the quilt my grandmother made, and the house was quiet in the way houses are when a crisis has passed and you're finally allowed to breathe. My mother made tea she knew neither of us would drink, and we sat there and she said, "Tell me everything." So I did, 4 years of everything. And my mother, who is not a dramatic person, who gardens and volunteers at the library and has strong opinions about municipal zoning, sat across from me and did not flinch once. She just listened. When I finished it, she said, "We're going to need a lawyer." She had already looked one up. That was the first moment I understood I wasn't doing this alone. The lawyer was a woman in her early 50s, the kind of competent that makes the air in a room feel steadier. At our first meeting, she went through everything methodically, the hospital records, the photos my mother had taken of my injury before I'd been discharged, the screenshots of his texts. She said, "This is a strong record." She explained what the family law process would look like in Ontario, the separation, the custody application, the restraining order. She walked me through legal aid eligibility since I had taken a leave from work after my daughter's birth and our income was predominantly his. She was matter-of-fact about all of it in a way that made it feel survivable. Then, she told me about the criminal side. She said that what he had done, the assault causing bodily harm, the repeated incidents, the text threats, was reportable. She said the police could lay charges independent of anything I did. She asked if I wanted to speak with someone at the Crown Attorney's office. I said yes. I won't pretend that period was clean. Nothing about it was. He retained his own lawyer within 48 hours of my leaving, and his first move was to contest my account of events. He said I had fallen. He said I was volatile and prone to exaggeration. He called my mother and left a voicemail that my lawyer later used in the family court proceedings. He showed up at my friend's apartment building in Toronto. I had moved in temporarily and stood in the lobby until her building manager called the non-emergency line. That call became part of the record too. The women at the Victim Services Organization were the ones who helped me understand what a safety plan actually looked like. Not in an abstract sense, but practically, who had copies of my important documents, which route I should take if I needed to leave quickly, what to do if he violated the restraining order. I had a file folder with my daughter's health card, my SIN, our passports, 3 months of bank statements, and a USB drive with every document my lawyer needed. My mother had a copy of all of it. My daughter started seeing a child therapist through the school board. She was 5.5 and she was having nightmares. The therapist told me this was normal, that children who witness and experience household conflict carry it in their bodies, and that play therapy was one of the best tools available. My daughter took to it quietly and seriously, the same way she took to everything. After 3 months, the therapist said she was doing well. She said my daughter had remarkable emotional vocabulary for her age. I thought, she learned it early. She had to. The investigation took several months. I gave my statement twice, once to the initial responding officer, once to the detective assigned to the file. Both times I was in a small room with bad lighting and a box of tissues, and I told the same story the same way, because it was the truth, and truth doesn't change. My husband was ultimately charged with assault, causing bodily harm. His lawyer tried to negotiate. My lawyer called me after the Crown's office communicated the offer and said, "This is your decision. I want to be clear about that." I sat with it for 2 days. I called my mother. I called the woman at Victim Services who had become, over the months, someone I trusted completely. I thought about my daughter and the frog boots and the fact that she was 5 years old and she already knew what the secret code was for. I said no to the deal. He pled guilty 4 months later. It was a Thursday afternoon in November, grey and cold in the particular way that southern Ontario gets in November, a coldness that sits inside your coat. I was in the courthouse in Brampton. I had dressed carefully, the way you dress when something important is happening and you want to be equal to it. My mother sat to my left. My lawyer sat to my right. When the judge read the disposition and I heard the word guilty, I did not cry. I had expected to cry. Instead, I felt something settle in my chest. Not joy, not triumph, but a kind of solidness. Like a floor appearing under me where there had only been air. He received a conditional sentence and a 3-year probation order. There were conditions I won't detail, but they included no contact with me or my daughter except through legal counsel. He also received mandatory programming. The family court process was separate and longer. In Ontario, the family law system moves carefully, which is frustrating when you are the person waiting, but I came to understand why. Our final order granted me primary residence of my daughter. His access was supervised, to be arranged through a third-party access center. He was ordered to pay child support in accordance with the federal child support guidelines, based on his income, as calculated by his T4 slips from the previous 3 years. His financial situation turned out to be considerably more complicated than I had known. The woman in Oakville, the woman in Mississauga, was named in the family proceedings as a material fact. The money he had spent on that other life, the lease, the shared accounts, the child support he was now also legally obligated to provide. It all came out in disclosure. My lawyer said the word dissipation with the kind of quiet precision that meant she was not done yet. She wasn't. By the time everything was finalized, I had received an equalization payment that allowed me to put a deposit on a 2-bedroom apartment in Hamilton, where I had a friend and where the cost of living made more sense on my income. I had returned to work part-time by then, remote, with an employer who had been, I'll say this, plainly decent about the whole situation in the way that occasionally restores your faith in workplaces. My daughter started grade 1 in September. She wore the frog boots on the first day. She carried a backpack that was almost as big as she was. She marched up the path to the school doors with the posture of someone who has somewhere important to be. I stood at the gate and I watched her go, and I let myself cry there in public, in the school parking lot, in a way I hadn't let myself cry through any of the hard parts. The other parents probably thought I was one of those first-day parents. I was fine with that. The thing about surviving something is that it doesn't announce itself cleanly. There's no single morning where you wake up and feel whole. It happens more like the way winter ends in Ontario. Not in one warm day, but in accumulated small ones, until you realize at some point that you've stopped bracing. You're just living. There are things that help. The therapist I found through my employee assistance program, a man in his 60s who had the office smell of old books and said very little but asked the right questions. The women's support group I attended at a community center in Hamilton on Wednesday evenings, where I sat in a circle with 7 other women and said things out loud that I had never said out loud before and heard them say yes and I know and same. My mother, always. The friend in Toronto who kept my records in her filing cabinet without asking any questions that would make me feel pitied. My daughter, who is 6 now and still deeply serious. She knows something happened. She doesn't know all of it yet. She will when she's older, in the right words, at the right time. We have a therapist helping us figure out what those words are. What I know is this. The woman who made that oatmeal on that morning 4 years ago believed that keeping quiet was the same as keeping safe. She thought if she managed everything carefully enough, her tone, her words, her proximity to his moods, she could keep the thing from breaking. The thing was already broken. It had been broken for years. She just couldn't see it because she was using all her energy to hold the pieces together. I am not her anymore. I am the woman who stood at a school gate in September and cried without apologizing for it. I am the woman who signed a lease in her own name, who has a filing cabinet with her own documents, who knows exactly which highway takes her to her mother in under an hour. I am also my daughter's mother, which is the most important thing. I am trying to raise someone who knows, in the deepest part of herself, that love does not look like fear. That the person who is supposed to protect you does not get to be the thing you need protection from. Some days that feels like enough to have done. Most days it feels like everything.